My name is Alyssa Rowan. I'm 32 years old. 3 weeks before my father placed that manila folder in front of me, I stood in a parking lot staring at a photograph that made my stomach drop. It was the house I grew up in. The house my grandmother had left behind. And there was a sold sign in the yard. Nobody had called me. Nobody had warned me. Nobody had even asked me. Then I saw my signature on a document I had never signed. That was the moment I realized my own family had been doing something behind my back. When your own family betrays you for money, treats you like you're weak, and thinks you won't do anything about it, you don't just feel angry. You start asking yourself how the people who were supposed to protect you could be the ones hurting you. Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, take a second to like the video and subscribe. Now, let me take you back to where this all began. And 3 weeks later, my father pushed a manila folder across the table and said, "It's just a formality, one more signature and we're all done with this." I already knew he was lying. What he didn't know was that during those 3 weeks, I had been quietly collecting the truth, and what neither of us knew was that this would not be the last piece of paper in my story. Months later, I would bring one of my own. But the story didn't begin with that folder. It began with my grandmother, Beatrice Holloway, and the family I had spent 32 years trying to keep together. I was always the one who gave in. If my mother wanted something, I said yes. If my brother wanted more, I let him have it. And whenever someone in the family got upset, somehow I was the one expected to stay quiet and make things right. I told myself that was what keeping the peace looked like. I didn't know that one day, my silence would become the very thing they used against me. If you'd met me at 25, at 28, even at 30, you'd have found a woman who apologized for things that weren't her fault, who let silences sit unchallenged at family dinners, who once let a landlord keep half her security deposit over a stain she hadn't made, because arguing felt like more trouble than the $200 was worth. I grew up on Birch Hollow Road, in a 3-bedroom ranch house with a crooked driveway. My grandmother Beatrice Holloway bought that house in 1979, saving for 11 years behind a print shop counter. When my grandfather died young, she raised my mother alone in it. When my parents married, Beatrice Holloway let them move in instead of paying rent elsewhere. Eventually the house just became ours. Nobody ever wrote down whose it actually was. I mowed that lawn starting at 13. I sat with Beatrice Holloway every other Sunday, while my brother Caleb Rowan played travel baseball. Nobody assigned me that job. It just became mine, quietly, the way most things did in my family. My mother, Janet Rowan, used to say it like a compliment. "Alyssa Rowan's just low maintenance. Caleb Rowan needs more from us." I heard her say it at a barbecue when I was 15, standing 3 feet away with a bag of ice in my hands. I decided, right then, in the small, stubborn way teenagers decide things, that being low maintenance was something I was good at. That decision followed me for 17 years, and it made me exactly the kind of person this family needed me to be. When Caleb Rowan crashed his car at 19, I Venmo'd my mother without being asked. When my rent went up 2 years in a row, and I quietly picked up weekend shifts, instead of asking my parents for help, the way Caleb Rowan always did without a second thought, nobody noticed, because nobody was watching for it. When Beatrice Holloway's health started slipping, I was the one driving 40 minutes each way, every other weekend, while Caleb Rowan visited on holidays, and got called such a good grandson for showing up at all. I want you to really sit with that version of me for a second, because she matters. She's the reason none of what comes next should have worked. And it very nearly did. Beatrice Holloway noticed, though. She noticed more than any of us gave her credit for. The spring before she died, she asked me to drive her to a lawyer named Walter Pierce. I sat in the waiting room 40 minutes. When she came out, she patted my hand. "I took care of something for you," she said. "Don't worry about the details." I asked what she meant. She just smiled and let it go the way I always let things go. That sentence turned out to be the only warning I'd ever get. I think about one more moment from that spring, one I didn't understand the weight of until much later. Beatrice Holloway and I were sitting on the porch swing, the same swing she and I had shared 100 Sundays before, and she asked me, out of nowhere. What would you do, Alyssa Rowan, if your mother ever tried to take something from you that was rightfully yours? I laughed it off. Mom wouldn't do that. Beatrice Holloway didn't laugh with me. She just looked out at the crooked driveway for a long moment and said, "Everyone thinks that about somebody, right up until the day they don't." I didn't ask what she meant. I let it pass the way I let everything pass, and went inside to get her a glass of water, because that felt like the useful thing to do, the safe thing to do, the thing that didn't require me to sit with a question I didn't want an answer to. Beatrice Holloway died 3 years ago, in February, in her sleep. My parents inherited the house, or so I believed. Nobody read a will aloud in some lawyer's office. There was just a folder my mother kept in a drawer, and a vague understanding that the house was theirs now. I still drove past Birch Hollow Road sometimes, on my way to Sunday dinner. I still felt something settle in my chest at that crooked driveway. I assumed the house would always just be there, the way you assume the sun comes up. I found out it's sold from a stranger's Facebook post. I stood in that parking lot a long time before I called my mother. My hands weren't steady, and they're always steady. "Mom," I said, "did you sell the house?" The pause was half a second too long. "We were going to tell you this weekend. We didn't want to make a big deal of it over the phone." "You sold it and weren't going to tell me for a week?" "Alyssa Rowan, it's a house. It's not like we sold you." I hung up before I said something I'd apologize for later. Protect the peace, even when the peace wasn't mine to protect anymore. And here's the part I'm not proud of. That night, sitting alone on my couch, I actually made a decision. I decided to let it go. I told myself the house was theirs to sell, legally or not, and that fighting my own parents over money would cost me more than it would ever give back. I wrote that decision down in the Notes app on my phone, like a little contract with myself. Don't make this a thing. It's not worth losing them over. I want you to remember that note, because 2 weeks later I would find out exactly how much that piece had already cost me, without my permission, for years. At Sunday dinner 4 days later, my father slid a check across the table. $4,000, barely looking at me. "Your share," he said, "for helping with Grandma those last few years." "Something out of what?" I asked. "What did it sell for?" My mother answered too fast. "Doesn't matter. Old house, repairs, realtor fees. You know how it goes." I didn't know how it goes, because nobody had told me a single number. Caleb Rowan sat across from me, scrolling his phone, saying nothing. "Where's Caleb Rowan living now?" I asked, mostly to change the air in the room. "He closed on a place last month," my mother said, brightening. 3 bedrooms, great school district. I cashed the check 2 days later. Some tired, low-maintenance part of me was already trying to close the file on the whole thing, the way I closed the file on everything. I told myself the note in my phone was still true, not worth losing them over. It would take one more accident, one envelope I wasn't even looking for, to break that promise to myself completely. The following week, I helped my mother unpack boxes at the rental. In a box labeled Miscellaneous, Beatrice Holloway, under a stack of recipe cards, I found an envelope from a law office I didn't recognize, Between and Casey, attorneys at law. Inside was one page, dated 4 years earlier, addressed to my mother. It mentioned the Beatrice Holloway M. Reyes Revocable Trust. One line stopped me cold. The house would pass in trust to Janet Rowan and Alyssa Rowan, in equal shares. I put the letter back exactly where I found it, and told my mother I had a headache. I sat in my car outside their rental for 20 minutes before I could drive. Beatrice Holloway hadn't left the house only to my parents. She'd left half of it to me, directly, 4 years before she died. The same year she'd told me not to worry about the details. My mother had known the entire time. She'd sold a house that was half legally mine, and handed me a check for it like a tip. I opened the Notes app on my phone that night, and deleted the line I'd written 2 weeks earlier. Not worth losing them over. I didn't replace it with anything. I just deleted it, and sat looking at the blank space where it used to be, feeling something in me shift for the first time in longer than I could remember. She'll understand when the time came. The time had already come, and gone, without me in the room for it. The next morning, still in scrubs, I called the title company, told them I was a beneficiary, confirming details on a closed sale. They confirmed the price, $280,000. They confirmed the deed had required every beneficiary's signature. I don't remember signing anything, I said. A pause. Papers shuffling. Alyssa Rowan's signature is on the deed, notarized March 14th. I was in Dallas that day, at a dental conference. I have the hotel receipt, the badge scan, 6 coworkers who'll say the same thing. I've never once stepped into an Oklahoma notary's office. I called Stephanie Ellis, my closest friend from college, now a family estates lawyer. She went quiet, then said it plainly. Alyssa Rowan, that's not a misunderstanding. That's forgery. Get your own attorney. Stop signing anything they hand you. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't try to talk myself out of what someone was telling me. I just listened. I ordered a copy of the deed from the county recorder. The signature was close. It wasn't mine. My R has never once curled that direction, not since middle school. Beneath it was a notary stamp, a woman named Gloria Bennett, whose office sat inside the same title company handling the sale. I called and asked general questions, not naming myself as a beneficiary. The receptionist mentioned, offhand, that family members sometimes video verify for someone traveling. Nobody had video verified anything with me. Nobody had asked. Then Caleb Rowan posted a photo online, standing in front of his new house, a moving truck behind him. Home sweet home, thanks Mom and Dad. $4,000 doesn't buy that house. $130,000. Quietly wired, might. I called my Aunt Marcia, my mother's sister, and asked how Caleb Rowan had really afforded it. She hesitated long enough that I already knew part of the answer. Your mother mentioned helping with a down payment, she said. I didn't know it was complicated. There's a trust, Marcia. Grandma left half that house to me, not to Mom, to distribute. To me, the silence told me she hadn't known that part either. 2 nights later, I looked up Gloria Bennett's name beside my mother's, just to see what connected them. What I found stopped me cold. Gloria Bennett had grown up 2 streets over, back on Birch Hollow Road itself. I found an old tagged photo from a neighborhood reunion page. My mother and a much younger Gloria Bennett, arms linked at a block party. Still thick as thieves after all these years. Love you, Pat. They weren't strangers inside some faceless process. They were childhood friends. My mother had called someone she'd known for 30 years and asked her to notarize a signature she knew wasn't mine. That friend had said yes. I gave the name to Stephanie Ellis, my attorney, and let her decide what to do with it. So many people, it turned out, had quietly agreed to help me never find out. I almost stopped digging there. Then, going through my own bank app one night out of habit, I noticed something I'd overlooked completely. The $4,000 check my father handed me sat exactly $200 under a threshold I vaguely remembered from a tax course years ago. The amount at which a bank flags a deposit for extra reporting, and a gift starts drawing attention on paper. I mentioned it to Stephanie Ellis almost as a joke. She didn't laugh. That's not a coincidence, she said. Somebody who knew exactly what they were doing chose that number. It's small enough not to raise a flag, and just large enough to look like a real gesture if anyone ever asked. I sat with that for a long time. It wasn't just that my parents had sold my inheritance out from under me. Somebody, probably my mother, the one who'd always kept the family checkbook, had sat down and calculated the exact smallest amount that would keep me quiet without ever drawing outside attention. I wasn't an afterthought in this plan. I was a line item somebody had budgeted for. I wanted to call my mother that same night. I didn't. Some old habit still wanted to give her a quiet chance to fix it, but something newer was growing underneath that habit. A small, stubborn refusal to hand this over cheap. So instead I hired Stephanie Ellis and gave her everything. She read it all in near silence, then looked up. This isn't a family disagreement, Alyssa Rowan. This is legal exposure they may not understand they've created. Find out what else they're planning first. I didn't have to wait long. 2 days later, I stopped by my parents' rental with a casserole dish, letting myself in the side door the way I always had. Nobody answered. Their voices carried from the kitchen. "She's not going to ask for a real accounting," my mother was saying. "We just need her to sign the release, so the title company closes their file." My father's voice, lower, tired. "And if she asks why there's a release at all, then we tell her it's standard paperwork. She trusts us, Edward Rowan. That's not going to change over a form she doesn't understand." I stood in the hallway with that dish, and something in my chest went cold and quiet at once. I set it on the counter and let myself back out. Neither of them ever knew I'd been there. I texted Stephanie Ellis that night. "I think they're about to hand me a release. I want to know exactly what it does first." This is the part I still have the hardest time saying out loud, even now. Stephanie Ellis's investigator, going through old hospice paperwork attached to the estate file, found a note from a hospice chaplain who'd sat with Beatrice Holloway in her final week. It wasn't evidence of anything illegal. It was worse than that, in a way that had nothing to do with courtrooms at all. The chaplain's notes, standard practice for hospice documentation, recorded a conversation from 4 days before Beatrice Holloway died. My mother had come to visit, alone, and told Beatrice Holloway, while she was fading in and out, while she was scared, while she was trying to make peace with leaving this world, that Alyssa Rowan already knew about the trust and was happy for Caleb Rowan to have more, since Alyssa Rowan had always been the responsible one and didn't need it the way he did. I read that line standing in Stephanie Ellis's office, and I had to sit down. My mother had lied to her own dying mother, to smooth things over, to make sure Beatrice Holloway went out believing her family was fair and whole and settled. She hadn't done it to protect me. She'd done it so Beatrice Holloway wouldn't spend her last days worried, and so nobody would ever have to explain why the trust wasn't going to be honored the way Beatrice Holloway intended. Beatrice Holloway died believing I was fine with all of it. She died believing I'd said something I never said, agreed to something I was never asked about. My mother had stolen that piece from her own dying mother, the same casual way she'd later steal a house from her own daughter. I didn't cry reading it. I went home and cried for an hour, alone, on my kitchen floor, in a way I hadn't let myself do since this whole thing started. The last thing Stephanie Ellis's investigator turned up almost didn't matter to the legal case at all, and mattered more to me than anything else combined. Among the boxes from the old house, in with tax documents my mother had never fully sorted, was a spiral notebook, half grocery lists, half a kind of private journal my mother had clearly never meant anyone to read. One entry, dated the same month as Beatrice Holloway's lawyer visit 4 years earlier, read, "Mom took Alyssa to see Walter today. Wouldn't tell me why. Wouldn't tell me why. I already know. She's always favored Alyssa Rowan, ever since Alyssa Rowan was little. Always thought I was too hard on her. Alyssa Rowan doesn't even want it the way I do. She'll never fight for it. That's the one good thing about how she turned out. That's the one good thing about how she turned out." I read that sentence maybe 15 times. My mother hadn't just tolerated my compliance my whole life. She had counted on it, cultivated it, seen it early enough to write it down in a notebook and quietly build a plan around it. She resented her own mother for favoring me, and instead of ever addressing that resentment honestly, she'd spent 32 years grooming me into someone too easy to ever notice being erased. That was the moment the anger stopped feeling complicated. It became about a woman who had looked at her own daughter and decided my silence was a resource to be managed, not a person to be loved differently than she'd been loved herself. I hadn't planned to say anything at Thanksgiving. I'd planned to wait for Stephanie Ellis, for the formal claim, for a quiet room with just my parents and Caleb Rowan in it. But my mother's older sister, Aunt Elaine, had flown in from Michigan that year, and somewhere between the turkey and the pie, she asked, brightly, in front of 11 people at that table, how the house money had all worked out for everyone. "Must be nice," Elaine said, "having that windfall to split 3 ways." I felt every eye at that table land on me at once, waiting for my usual answer. Something small, something easy, something that let the conversation move on without friction. The old version of me already had the sentence half formed. "It worked out fine, Aunt Elaine. Pass the potatoes." I didn't say that. It wasn't split 3 ways, I said instead. into a room that went instantly, uncomfortably quiet. It was sold for $280,000. My name was forged on the deed, and I only found any of this out because a stranger posted a photo of a sold sign online. My mother's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. My father's face went the color of the tablecloth. "Alyssa Rowan," my mother said, low, urgent. "This isn't the time." "You keep saying that," I said. "It's never the time, according to you." It wasn't the time at the closing table, and it wasn't the time when you handed me a check like a tip, and it's apparently not the time now, in front of the one relative who might actually ask a question you can't smooth over. Nobody at that table said a word for almost a full minute. Uncle Douglas set down his wine glass. My cousin Tessa, 16 years old, looked at her plate like she wished she could disappear into it. Aunt Elaine, to her credit, didn't back down. "Janet Rowan," she said, quiet now. "Is that true?" My mother didn't answer. She didn't have to. Her silence, in front of that whole table, said more than any explanation could have. I didn't get the satisfaction of a full confession that day. What I got instead was something almost as important. 11 witnesses, who now knew my name, wasn't the only thing that had been quietly signed away without my permission. And a mother, who for the first time in my entire life, couldn't talk her way out of a room in front of people who mattered to her. I left before dessert. Nobody stopped me at the door. My cousin Tessa caught up to me in the driveway, still in her socks, arms wrapped around herself against the cold. "I didn't know any of that," she said. "About the signature. About any of it." I told her it wasn't her fault, that nobody her age should have to carry any of this. She hugged me longer than a 16-year-old usually hugs anybody, and said, quietly, "I always thought you were the strong one in the family. I didn't know you had to fight this hard to actually be that." I sat in my car in my aunt's driveway for a long time after that, engine running, heat blasting, watching my own breath fog the windshield before the defroster caught up. I didn't cry. I felt something steadier than crying, something closer to certainty. Whatever happened next, I wasn't going back to being the woman who deleted a note in her phone and called it peace. My phone buzzed twice before I pulled out of the driveway. The first was from Aunt Elaine. "I'm so sorry, honey. I had no idea. Call me if you need anything." The second was from my mother. That was humiliating. "We will talk about this at home." I read both messages twice, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel obligated to answer either one that night. My father called me 2 days later. "Just the two of us," he said. "Just paperwork." I sat across from him at that kitchen table, and he slid the folder toward me. Routine, like a form at the DMV. "It's just a formality," he said. "One more signature and we're all done with this." I opened it slowly. A release and waiver of trust beneficiary claims. Beneath it, a personal guarantee form. My name and social security number already filled in. Co-signing a refinance loan on Caleb Rowan's mortgage. I set both pages flat on the table. "You want me to release my claim," I said, "and co-sign a loan for Caleb Rowan's house. Same day. Same folder." "It's not as complicated as it looks," he said. "You wouldn't actually be on the hook for anything." "Dad," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "My signature is already on the deed, notarized on a day I was 3 states away. I have the hotel receipt, the badge scan. 6 coworkers who'll say the same. I know the notary grew up 2 streets from Mom. I've seen the photos. I know what Mom told Grandma 4 days before she died. And after Thanksgiving, so does half the family." His face went completely still. "You know about all of it," he said, quiet, not a question. "I'm not signing either of these," I said, "and I think you already know why." What my father didn't say that afternoon, he said 3 weeks later, over coffee at a diner off Route 51. "I knew before you found the letter," he told me, turning his cup slowly. "I didn't know about the hospice conversation until Stephanie Ellis's letter came. I want you to believe that, even if you don't believe much else I say right now. Your mother never told me she'd said that to Beatrice Holloway. When I found out, I didn't sleep for 2 nights." "That doesn't undo it, Dad." "I know it doesn't," he said. I'm not giving it as an excuse. I'm giving it because I need you to know that even I didn't think she'd go that far. I don't forgive you yet, I told him. I might, not yet. That's fair, he said. And for once, he didn't argue. My mother wanted a dinner the following Sunday, after Thanksgiving, after Stephanie Ellis's formal claim had already been sent. I almost didn't go, but I needed to finish saying the rest of it, in a room, in front of my brother. I found out our house sold from a stranger on Facebook, I said, sitting down anyway. I found out my signature was forged. I found out Grandma left half that house to me, and nobody told me. And I found out what you told Grandma 4 days before she died. My mother's face drained of color completely. I also found your notebook, I said. The one where you wrote that my not fighting for things was the one good thing about how I turned out. The silence that followed had a different weight than anything else that year. Even Caleb Rowan set his fork down. I think you've resented me since I was small, I said. I think Grandma seeing me clearly, when you never felt seen the same way, was something you never worked through. Instead of ever saying that to me honestly, you spent 30 years making sure I'd never be able to fight back when it mattered. My mother didn't argue. For the first time in my entire life, she had absolutely nothing to say. Caleb Rowan pushed his plate away, jaw tight. I didn't know about any of that, he said. Not the deed, not Grandma, none of it. But I want to be honest about what I did know. He looked at our parents, then back at me. Brianna asked me in March where the down payment came from. I told her not to worry about it. She said it felt like something you'd want to know. I shut that down on purpose. Not because I thought it was forged. Because some part of me knew asking too many questions might cost me the house. I appreciate you telling me that, I said. It doesn't undo it, but it means you decide what happens differently now. I already started, he said. Brianna found the guarantee form in Dad's email 3 days ago. She told me to call you. I didn't. I should have. The full accounting arrived 4 weeks later, 3 pages, itemized. $130,000, wired directly to Caleb Rowan. $11,000 in estate cleanup, which included a family cruise that same spring. $6,000 to Gloria Bennett's company in fees no other client had ever paid. $129,000 left sitting, untouched, waiting for my signature before it would ever be offered to me at all. It stopped looking like a mistake my mother had backed into. It looked like a plan, built line by line, with an ending already decided long before I ever saw that Facebook post. My parents' attorney contacted Stephanie Ellis within 2 weeks. They agreed to a full settlement, my entire share, plus interest, plus the inflated fees, no courtroom required. Gloria Bennett's notary commission was suspended 3 months later. The refinance on Caleb Rowan's house fell through. He and Brianna downsized. Brianna texted me herself, not Caleb Rowan, just to say she was glad I hadn't signed, and that she hoped we could build something honest. My mother didn't call for 6 weeks. When she finally did, her voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. I keep thinking about what I told your grandmother, she said. I don't have a way to make that right. I know that. No, I said, you don't. Getting the money back didn't fix the part of me that had spent 32 years assuming my own needs mattered least in every room I walked into. That part took longer, and it took more than a settlement check to touch. I started therapy that winter, with a woman named Dr. Okonkwo, who specialized in family estrangement and adult sibling dynamics. In our 3rd session, she asked me to describe the moment I first remembered choosing silence over speaking up. I told her about the barbecue, the bag of ice, my mother's voice carrying across the yard. She wrote something down and said, "That's usually where we find the real work. Not the deed, the belief underneath it. The one that told an 8-year-old that being loved meant needing less than everyone around her." She was right. It took months to name it properly. I had spent my whole life believing my needs required a legal case built around them before they counted as real. I used part of the settlement to put a down payment on a small house that spring. The first thing in my adult life, with only my name on the deed. I stood in the empty living room the day I got the keys and cried for almost 20 minutes. Not from grief this time, but from something that took me a while to recognize as simple, uncomplicated pride. Here's the part nobody in my family saw coming, including me, if I'm honest. 6 months after that first folder landed on a kitchen table, I asked my parents to meet me. Not at their place, not at mine, but at Stephanie Ellis's office, on my terms, with my attorney sitting beside me instead of across from me for once. I brought my own folder that day, the kind with my name on the tab, not theirs. Inside was a document Stephanie Ellis and I had drawn up together. Not a release, not a waiver, nothing that asked me to give anything up. It was a simple written agreement, plain language, laying out exactly what I was and wasn't willing to continue as a family member going forward. No more signing anything without reading it myself, no matter who asked or how urgently. No more financial decisions made about me without me in the room. And one line, near the bottom, that Stephanie Ellis told me afterward she'd never seen a client ask to include before, an acknowledgement, in writing, signed by both my parents, of what my mother told my grandmother in that hospice room. "You don't have to sign this," I told them, sliding it across the table, the way my father had slid his folder to me, all those months earlier. "But if you want any real relationship with me going forward, I need to know you can look at what happened and put your name to it honestly, just once, on paper. The way you asked me to do, over and over, without ever once asking if I understood what I was agreeing to." My mother read it twice before she picked up the pen. My father signed right after her, his hand steadier than I expected. It wasn't a courtroom victory. It wasn't a viral confrontation with 200 witnesses. It was one quiet document, in a lawyer's office, that finally had my terms written into it instead of theirs. That was the last paper in this story. And this time, I was the one who wrote it. I don't have a neat lesson to hand you, tied up with a bow. I have this instead. My mother spent 30 years loving the version of me that never asked for anything, and I spent 30 years thinking that was the only version of me worth loving back. It wasn't a house that finally taught me otherwise. It was one dying woman's kindness, hidden in a lawyer's letter, waiting 4 years for me to be ready to find it. I'm not the easy daughter anymore. I'm just Alyssa Rowan. That's enough now. It always should have been. Maybe some of you know what it feels like to be the one who always understands, always forgives, always stays quiet just to keep everyone else happy. And maybe you've been that person for so long that people forgot you have feelings too. If that's you, I hope tonight you remember one thing: you matter too. Tell me in the comments, have you ever stayed silent to keep the peace, even when it was hurting you? I'd really like to hear your story. And if you want to stay with me for more stories like this, you can subscribe. I'd be glad to have you here. Take care of yourself. And don't be afraid to speak when something in your heart tells you it's time.